Hi, and welcome to the Stockscores Market Minutes for July 16th, 2012. This week's topic is trade abnormal. We will get to that in just a moment. But first, a reminder, you can subscribe to my free weekly newsletter at stockscores.com/newsletters.asp. Well, when I say trade abnormal, what I'm really talking about is focusing on alpha. To beat the market, you have to find alpha stocks. Those are stocks trading on their own story and outside their correlation to the overall market. Now, the best marker for alpha is abnormal trading activity. Abnormal price and volume tells us something is going on specific to the company, and that is when we want to trade those stocks. Now, you can use the Stockscores market scan to filter for abnormal price and volume action. We have specific filters in that tool to look for the stocks that are either up or down more than expected, or trading much more volume than normal, or both. And I strongly recommend using that filter to find alpha stocks. All right, let's get into the analysis. The first chart up is the S&P 500 ETF, SPY. You can see that we are coming to a point here in this pattern where the bottoms are rising up toward the top. We are converging there, and that means we're going to resolve this pattern very soon. Now, we had a pretty good up day on Friday, and that takes us very close to that downward trend line. We're probably going to get stuck there in the next day or two, and expect then, if the market can break through that line, we're going to head up towards long-term resistance at 142, or we might get bashed lower yet again. And ultimately, if we break that shorter term upward trend line, this market is headed lower. So right now I'm neutral on this market, but it's at a real critical time when the market's going to break one way or the other. Keep an eye on this chart. TSX is in a similar situation where the bottoms are rising towards the tops. We're right at support, so my inclination for this week is that the TSX will bounce higher. We're actually seeing the Canadian dollar start to improve and the US dollar weakening a little bit, and that should be helpful for commodities. Oil's making a pretty good bounce back from oversold conditions, and that helps the Canadian market as well. Generally speaking, still neutral with a sort of a negative bent in the long term because we are below that downward trend line, but in the short term I expect sideways to slightly higher for the TSX. The VIX has broken to new lows, broken through support from pessimism. That's a sign that there really isn't a whole lot of fear in this market. Investors are no longer concerned about what might happen in Europe or the whole financial system collapsing. The focus has returned to the economy and to stocks specifically. The 20-year bond, the Treasury bond in the U.S. continues to attract money. It is now at resistance where it should stall. But the point here is that this market shows us that investors are looking for safety. So they're not scared because money is not coming into the VIX. In fact, it's going out of the VIX, but it is still hiding here in the TLT. So investors really aren't hiding from the stock market. They just haven't found the motivation to put money to work yet, and it's instead being put into low-risk assets like the 20-year Treasury bond. US dollar rose up to resistance and got stuck. We've seen it fall back. I wouldn't be surprised to see it fall back a little more in the short term. However, the long-term pattern here does have rising bottoms, and that is a sign that the US dollar is strong and is the preferred currency globally. The gold market is really part of the problem with the gold market is that strength in the US dollar. It is hurting gold. Gold isn't really acting as that hedge against concern, against fear that it was once upon a time, but it's also approaching the pointy end of that triangle, and that's where this pattern will get resolved, either with a break to the upside or downside. Now, given that the trend into the pattern is down, we are more likely to see the break down out of the pattern. So I expect that maybe not this week, but in the next few weeks, gold should break to the downside, but there is that possibility it breaks to the upside, and so we have to watch for the break to telegraph the next move. Oil, as I said, is bouncing back from oversold conditions. We can say it's oversold because it's far below that downward trend line. I've drawn that there in black across those tops. And so what we're really seeing right now is a bounce back up to the trend line, and that's really just taking out the fear and the pessimism that was in this market. Still not a great looking chart in the long term, but in the short term, don't be surprised to see further gains in oil. So my outlook then is neutral on US and Canadian stocks, and mostly because we're just coming into that low volatility zone and those price patterns on those markets, and we're going to see a break one way or the other. We have to watch for that break to tell us what to do next. I remain bearish on gold. But again, we're coming to a critical point there. Should break lower, could break higher. We'll see what happens. Oil, I'm neutral. I think long term I remain bearish on oil, but in the short term bullish because it's rising back to that downward trend line. And so it's a question of how you are trading it. Really, it's a case right now that investors are not really scared of owning stocks. They just can't find any reason to do so. Now, stocks trading abnormally, those alpha stocks, can move well because the market isn't holding back from trading stocks as long as there's something worth trading. The problem is the general purchase of stocks right now is not working real well, and so I don't advise that. If you are going to trade the stock market, trade those abnormal stocks, focus on alpha. Of course, any indication by the Fed that stimulus is on the way should send stocks higher. That could be the catalyst to break that downward trend line, but until then, I think the markets are just going to drift around here. Well, that has been the Stockscores Market Minutes for July 16th, 2012. Have a great week in the market and trade well.